Welcome to today's session, Session 1 on BSBWHS401, which is implement and monitor WHS policies, procedures and programs to comply with legislative requirements. My name is Alexis Martin and I'm a teacher in this unit and the unit coordinator. Today's session will provide an overview of the unit. We'll look at the two assessments, we'll look at the topics that are covered in the learning resource, how you can utilise the WHS Research Centre library resources, and then we'll have a closer look at topics 1 and 2. A follow-up session, Session 2, will look at topics 3, 4 and 5 in more detail. So to understand the assessments in this unit, I thought it would be worth having a look at the training.gov.au website, which is the National Training Package Regulator, where a panel of industry and RTO experts come together and determine what will be included in the units within a training package. For this unit, clearly a legislative basis for developing policies, procedures and programs is required. And it applies and has been designed to assess those with supervisory responsibilities to implement those policies, procedures and programs. So the performance evidence that the assessments are looking to analyse is you explaining WHS information clearly to the team and ensure that your team has access to relevant information in an appropriate structure and appropriate language. So language that's targeted at the position that your team members fill, or positions where it's multi-positions. It's also assessing evidence that you can implement and monitor procedures according to those policies, but most importantly in accordance with the legislation. Now, this unit will focus heavily on Section 19 of the WHS Act 2011 for those in New South Wales. That's the harmonised legislation which is in place in all states and territories with the exception of Victoria and Western Australia, who still have the OHS Acts. The knowledge evidence that we'll be assessing is that you can outline what the legal responsibilities are of and duties for managers, supervisors and the PCBU. So that might be an unfamiliar term to you. It's persons who have responsibility for the control of businesses or undertakings. And so that's from small business right through to very large multinational businesses. For example, on a construction site, you might have a principal contractor and many subcontractors. Each contracting organisation has a PCBU and each has a responsibility for the work health and safety of its people and others who are on that site. Need to be able to identify the key provisions of relevant legislation. Legislation includes not just the WHS Act, but also the WHS regulations that are relevant in your state or territory, or OHS regulations for Victoria and Western Australia. The codes of practice as well, or compliance codes as they are in Victoria. Need to be able to explain what your organisational policies and procedures state regarding managing risks in the workplace, the importance of effective consultation, and how the hierarchy of control applies in the work area. So that's a mechanism or a tool that is used in identifying appropriate controls to manage risks where those risks are not able to be eliminated. So there's a lot of evidence that needs to be assessed, and therefore the two assessments are fairly detailed. So assessment 1 is a report, researching the legislation, identifying how the WHS system operates in your workplace, which will include looking at policies, procedures, and the WHS programs that are in place, and determining whether they are effective. To identify if they're effective, you'll need to review the legislation, both the Act, the regulations, and the codes of practice. Identify where there are gaps and prepare recommendations. There's a guide to your report format in that assessment for you. The second assessment is based on a training program. You'll remember that I referred to needing to assess that information, WHS information, is provided to team members in an appropriate structure and appropriate language. So this will assess that you can do that. The program must have a component that involves coaching or mentoring. They're both methods that are ideal for adult learning, but you will identify a WHS training need, and that could be, for example, a manual handling task that happens in the workplace. So there may be some off-job component, firstly, where that particular manual handling is trained through use of role plays, observation, performing, etc. And then when you go back on the job, you, the supervisor, needs to then mentor or coach that individual to ensure that they can transfer the learning from the classroom back onto the job. The task 2 in that assessment asks you also to prepare an incident report. So reporting is also a critical aspect of meeting the obligations for the workplace in providing a safe place of work. There are specific tips on the OLS in the Assessments tab for those two assessments as well. So how are we going to provide the information that you need to be deemed competent in this unit? So in the Resources tab, you'll find the learning resource in both an electronic and print version. I've referred to the tips previously. And then the WHS Research Centre, or the online WHS Library, which is a fabulous resource. So the learning resource itself, as you can see there are 5 topics, and we'll look at topic 1 and topic 2 in a bit more depth in this session. The legislation, the codes of practice, and other relevant information you will find in the library resource. So Safe Work Australian tab, which is the second one in, on the top row there, has a lot of really good information for you, and then go into your state or territory. So in this case, you've got the compliance and compensation tabs for New South Wales. However, you only need to access the compliance tab for this assessment. We're not looking at workers' compensation. So the key messages to be successful in this unit: use the legislation. Note that a PCBU's duty of care liability moves down the organisational structure, so from the company directors to managers and supervisors and workers. Section 19, as I referred to before, a key section in the Act, looks at a PCBU's primary duty of care, and you'll be very familiar with what that is by the end of this unit. I've also recommend Division 4 of the Act to look at what due diligence is and the obligations in the organisation to ensure that there are safe methods of work, that there's a safety management plan, and ensuring that there are appropriate resources available for managing safety and that those are used in the workplace. It's really about taking every reasonable precaution to protect the health, safety and welfare of all persons in the workplace, not just employees. And as I've indicated before, a management system is an effective way to demonstrate to a Safe Work Australia inspector, for example, that safety is understood and implemented in a systematic way. So topic 1, which we'll look at in some more depth now. Provide information to the work team on WHS policies and procedures. Now, some workplaces don't have them, won't have a document that's titled a WHS policy and may not have systematically developed procedures to follow. But there may well be certain practices in place or references to a safety culture that might be in the induction handbook, that might be written in other documents. So when you're reviewing what's in place in your workplace, don't just look for something headed up WHS, but look more broadly and what is it that people do and what do they follow in terms of any written instruction about keeping a safe workplace. So this topic, you'll find detailed reading under that essential reading heading at the bottom of the page there with the arrow pointing to the document. And each topic will have a document that outlines the specifics of it. And what I've attempted to do here is to link each of the learning elements in the topics to questions in the assessments, just to help you as you're going through your assessment to go to the topics and gather the information that you need to understand what it is that you're doing. So there are 6 learning elements in topic 1. Clearly, starting with the importance of what work health and safety is and the roles and responsibilities under that legislation. And I've already talked at length about the role of the PCBU. So part 2B of assessment 1 focuses very much on that first learning element. There'll be an overview of the regulations, the codes of practice and standards. I haven't specifically mentioned Australian standards, but there is a link on the WHS library to Australian standards, and you can have a look at those, particularly where there are high risk activities in the workplace. Standards will help identify the processes that should be followed, likewise the codes of practice. Principles of risk management, and also the principles of hazard identification, assessment and control. So all 3 of those learning elements are addressed in assessment 1, part 2A, and there are a number of subsets of part 2A, questions A through to G. Also look at policies and procedures and what should be in those. And that refers specifically to part 2A, small a, and again to the PCBU's responsibility to provide policies and procedures. The last area covered in topic 1 looks at how we communicate information to the team. And we know that there's an obligation to do that. And part 2A, small e, in assessment 1 refers to that, but learning elements here are also picked up in later topics and explored in much more detail. Topic 2 is focusing on the participation arrangements specifically. So communication is critical. We need to be able to demonstrate in workplaces that we consult with workers, why that consultation is important, the legislative basis for conducting consultation with workers, and having programs that engage employees in that participation. So 4 learning elements here in topic 2 that will explore that in greater depth. Consultation, the systematic approach, is highlighted there in the 3rd learning element, but you'll note that primarily this information relates to part 2A-E, so 1 sub-question in part A, which is based on consultation, but of course also the obligation on a PCBU to ensure that that happens in the workplace brings into account part 2B of assessment 1. The recording of outcomes, so making records, is picked up in that incident report in assessment 2. So a systematic approach is what you will glean from topic 2, how to implement a systematic approach to consultation within the workplace. And every systematic approach, as you would know, requires planning it out, implementing the relevant programs that you've got, making sure that you monitor their success, and of course review for improvement. So that's the 2 topics that we plan to look at in today's session. I'd like you to think about any questions that you have as a result of that. Now remember, this unit, because it's so applicable in many training packages, you might be in a human resources course, both the Cert 4 and the diploma have this unit. You might be doing New Small Business. You might be doing the Skills for Business program. You might be doing a Cert 4 in Leadership and Management, or you might be doing a Cert 4 in Business. And you would still be doing this unit. So if you're a supervisor, it's directly relevant to you. If you're an HR officer, then it's information for you to assist supervisors and managers to meet their obligations under this legislation. So I hope now that you have enough information to plan your approach to learning in this unit. What other information would you like to assist you to get started? I'm really interested in your feedback on that. As I've indicated before, there are tips on the OLS for each assessment. And of course, session 2 we'll do a little bit of a review of what I've covered here, but primarily then focus on topics 3, 4 and 5. So to find out more, always the bottom line is to ring a teacher to help you with information. So I wish you well in getting started on this unit. As I say, I would really welcome your feedback if this has been too rushed or has taken too long, what you'd like to see in the information that's presented to you, because it is your learning that we're talking about. So thank you so much for joining, and look forward to talking to you in the new session.